Welcome to the Power Sweep podcast. My name is Chris Van Dyne, and we are back for another week of college football. And this is an exciting week. We have our five-star game of the month going off this weekend, free to all Power Sweep subscribers. And we're going to get this started right away because we're really excited. We've got a guest that is going to be the first time joining us as a guest handicapper. Andrew Fillipponi from 93.7 The Fan in Pittsburgh, someone that I grew up listening to in Pittsburgh when I lived there on 93.7 The Fan back in the early days of that station, and then also with FanDuel, More Ways to Win. Thanks for joining the podcast, Andrew, and I'm glad to have you here.
Chris, I like the way you introduced me. You said first time, but that doesn't mean this will be the only time, which I like. Hopefully I won't blow my picks bad enough where I'm one and done. I'd like to survive in advance here and come on another time. We've known each other for a while now. The work you've done with Phil Steele, I've got so much respect for the amount of passion and work and time that you guys put into college football. And, just for everybody out there who doesn't know me, I grew up, I would say college football, and specifically, this is going to be so maybe absurd to your listeners, but when I was growing up in upstate New York, it was at just the right time where Syracuse football was actually a relevant, good team when they had Donovan McNabb, and they were about an hour away from where I grew up as a kid, and so that was probably maybe the first team or first sport that I really got into hardcore, like not just wore T-shirts and hats and said I was a fan of this team, but actually legitimately watched every game and gave a crap whether they won or lost. They went to the Big East Championship. They won it. They played Florida in an Orange Bowl. They beat Tom Brady in Michigan at the Big House. Like, those were great days for me that got me hooked and obsessed with college football. And you and Phil Steele and the guides you guys put out every year are always a must for me. So I'm super honored to be on with you guys right now.
I appreciate you being on here, and you do a lot of great work in Pittsburgh and nationally with FanDuel, and this is a great week to have you on. This is actually pointed to this week specifically to have you on because of all the great college football action we're done. As much as I love the FCS, the FBS, FCS games where teams are minus 45 and 50, they're not a lot of fun. I'm glad we're past those, and now we get into the meat of the schedule. And the first game I want to talk to you about is the big game this weekend, Ohio State, Notre Dame. Ohio State laying 3.5, depending on where you get it, total at 54.5. Buckeyes weren't very impressive their first couple games, came out and played better last week. Notre Dame's been kind of on a roll with Sam Hartman, a quarterback. What are your thoughts on this game? Do you think Notre Dame can pull the upset? And is there any plays you would suggest on this game for the listeners?
Oh, definitely. And, I watch Notre Dame every weekend. I'm one of those guys that even though I'm not a Notre Dame fan, everybody in the Northeast is either related to or friends with someone who's obsessed with Notre Dame football. And so my stepbrother was a giant Notre Dame fan growing up, and their games were always on at home. So just old habits die hard. It's a tradition. I watch Notre Dame probably every weekend. So I've seen all four of their games. They got the extra game in Dublin where they blew out Navy. And I've seen Ohio State. I watched the entire Indiana game and bits and pieces of the other two. If you had told me before this past weekend that Ohio State would be favored at Notre Dame, I would tell you, Chris, that was a reputational thing. That was more about what Ohio State did in the past and not so much what they had done this year, because you hit it unimpressive. Indiana, I mean, both quarterbacks, McCord could never get going. You had Marvin Harrison Jr. with one of his worst games since putting on a Buckeyes uniform. So, yeah, I mean, I would have told you 3.5 points. That's just because the odds makers think that Notre Dame is just a team that is still not ready to show up and win a game in a spot like this, even though they've done that against Clemson now. So they've proven that they can knock off a team like that, albeit one they're more familiar with, I guess, even though what they did at Ohio State last year, Chris. I mean, they were very competitive in week 1 last year, even when Stroud was the quarterback. I thought their defense was outstanding in that game before they went and lost the Marshall game at home, which was obviously a huge embarrassment. So that's really my way of saying I would take Ohio State minus 3.5. I did not. I thought even though it was Central Michigan and maybe they were looking ahead, I thought there were some things in that game actually with a backup quarterback out there for Central Michigan that concerned me about the Notre Dame defense. I'm also a little bit more concerned, even though their left tackle is phenomenal, about their offensive line holding up in this game. Look, Hartman has been excellent. He's been one of the best quarterbacks and one of the best players in all of college football. And North Carolina State's defense, I think, is good. But I just can't bring myself to bet Notre Dame in this game right now. I think we're actually getting value in Ohio State because of what's happened so far this year. And this past week, I think we saw Ohio State's offense finally click, even though it was against Western Kentucky's defense. And we saw their defense, maybe more than anything else, stop a team that knows how to at least put up points. I thought Western Kentucky would score a whole heck of a lot more than 10 points in that game.
Yeah,
so I'm leaning Ohio State right now, minus 3.5, Chris.
I hear. Any thoughts on the total at 54.5? You mentioned how
well,
Notre Dame's how well Notre Dame's defense is playing.
Yeah, I would probably take the under. I watch Sam Hartman a lot at Wake Forest. This is the best he's ever played. He's been in college football for a very long time. He's around better players now. I get all of that. But it's Navy, it's Tennessee State, it's Central Michigan. The North Carolina State game is such a quirky game because of the long weather delay. And I'm not a Brennan Armstrong guy. I mean, I think he's put up big numbers. He did at Virginia, but I think he's such a limited passer. And he threw 3 interceptions in that game. And if you actually watch that game, I don't think the final score is indicative of how close it actually was. It was a game for about 3.5 quarters. And then Notre Dame scored some tack-on touchdowns late.
Yeah, it was 24-17 going into the fourth quarter.
Yeah, Chris, I think that score is actually a little bit misleading. So, hey, I bet Notre Dame over 8.5 wins, and I feel pretty good about that bet right now. But I still don't think this is a game they ultimately win. I'm going to take Ohio State, and I'm going to go the under in this game. The under hit in this game last year, and I think it will in this one too.
Yeah, it hit easily last year, 21-10. Ohio State won that game. You mentioned everyone.
I think their secondary, Chris. I think their secondary can shut down Notre Dame's receivers. I'm still trying to figure out. They moved Tyree from running back to the slot receiver role. He's a nice player, but what is he going to do? Who is their top receiver with the guys they lost from last year? Mayer's playing for the Raiders now. Hartman's put up, sick numbers, but consider who it was against. I think Ohio State's defense, their defense has been good in every game this year. And so I think the best unit in this game, if I'm going to rank all 4, I think is probably the Ohio State defense.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned everyone's got that Notre Dame fan that they're a friend or family. I did. My best friend growing up, Jamel Chamberlain, big Notre Dame fan. My first foray into gambling was when I was 13 years old and Notre Dame played Florida State in that showdown with Charlie Ward in the regular season. And I thought for sure that Charlie Ward was going to mow him down. I bet 10 Notre Dame fans that Florida State would win that game. And I lost, and I had to.
Is that in '93? Is that the '93 game you're talking about?
Yeah, I didn't have lunch money for like 2 weeks because of that.
That is, for people that are not older college football fans, that is one of the craziest college football seasons from this perspective. Think about this, Chris, right? So Florida State loses to Notre Dame. Notre Dame goes up to number 1. Notre Dame gets beat, losing the entire game. They come to that game, right? So Florida State and Notre Dame both had one loss. And at the end of the year, I think didn't they put Florida State ahead of Notre Dame?
They did.
Didn't that happen? Didn't Florida State play Nebraska in the championship game there, Chris? So think about that. The team that lost the head-to-head matchup ended up getting ranked ahead of that team. Very interesting.
Yeah,
30 years ago that happened.
Pre-playoff, yeah. All right, let's go. I wanted to ask you, have you identified an underdog that you like this week that you think could win outright?
Okay, so let's just get this out there. I'm not going to use this team, but I just want to get this out there. Do not waste your money, even if it's just $20 or $50 or whatever you're comfortable in betting. Find better ways to wager this Saturday than Colorado money line. Don't do that again. I know it worked against TCU and the number was the same. And it's fun to bet on Coach Prime and what he's done there already. He's taken not only college football, but the entire sports world by storm. What's going on there, but please don't do that. Probably won't even cover there. I think we're looking at a run here for Colorado where they're going to lose and get it handed back to them. I think we saw, why the potential for that when they needed to go to overtime, double overtime to beat an average at best Mountain West team in Colorado.
Totally agree.
Colorado State. So don't do that, Chris. Do not under any circumstance bet Colorado this week. I mean, there's so many great games. This is the most top 25 matchups we've had in a week since 2006, since week 3 of that season, which was that's another topsy-turvy year. Yeah, I'm going to give a local game out for everybody. Pitt's quarterback is terrible. Phil Jurkovec, who was at Notre Dame, went to Boston College, had one really good year there that got him on NFL radars, then got sacked more than any quarterback in college football, and came back to Pittsburgh. He played high school football here, was a 5-star recruit. Now he's Pitt's quarterback. They scored 6 points at West Virginia last week, which is hard to do. West Virginia's defense, especially their pass defense, is just absolutely awful. And to score only 6 points in a rivalry game is just horrific. It's horrendous. But I've covered Pitt football now for about a decade and a half. If there's one thing they do, it's they are competitive in games when the other team is ranked and no one gives them a shot to win. So they are playing North Carolina Saturday night. There might not be, from a Power 5 standpoint, on paper, a bigger quarterback mismatch right now than Drake May versus Phil Jurkovec. But I've watched North Carolina. After their South Carolina win, which is very good, I'm not now they scored 31 against Minnesota. That actually was probably a win that I should give them a little bit more credit for. But I just have seen Pat Narduzzi's Pitt team go to Clemson and win. They beat number 2 Miami. They've beaten Notre Dame. They beat Penn State and kept Penn State out of the college football playoff. They are one of these weird programs, almost like Purdue, Chris, where they have one of these games every year where they have no business winning, where they knock off one of those top 25 teams. And I just have a weird feeling that they're going to be competitive against North Carolina. We know North Carolina's defense is not anything to really write home about. Look what App State did to them a couple of weeks ago. So I think you're getting 8+ points. This line got bet up. I think it got bet up so high where now I would actually swing the other way and take Pitt to be competitive and maybe even put a little bit of money on the money line, because they just have a history under Pat Narduzzi in his 9th year of finding ways to pull out games like this where everyone has them written off and a big underdog in the game.
Well, I'll tell you 2 stats that support your point. In the last 7 games, Drake May, 10 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. He hasn't looked the same as he did early last year. And the
Agreed.
other thing is, North Carolina, you mentioned Narduzzi and Pitt's propensity for pulling upsets and keeping in games when you least expect them to. North Carolina is 1-7-1 as an away favorite. And you look, they had a close game against Georgia State last year. They had a close game against Virginia where they didn't cover. That was a bad Virginia team. They only won by 7. A couple years ago, they were favored at Florida State, 13.5-point favorite, lost outright. They lost to Virginia later on that year on the road as a 7-point favorite. So Mac Brown has an equally impressive, or opposite impressive, habit of losing games as a favorite, especially on the road. So I definitely agree with you. That was a game that we actually circled as a potential underdog play. We had North Carolina by 3 in this game. So I'm with you on this.
And I think the Drake May thing is under the radar right now. And I wonder how long it goes on for. And I wonder when it becomes something that gets onto the NFL radar, because the same thing happened to Sam Howell. Now, Howell lost Michael Carter and Javonte Williams, and everybody used that as an excuse, but this is now trending in the direction 2 NFL quarterbacks in a row where they have regressed in their NFL prospect year, where this is the year before they leave for the league. And that Drake May thing, Pitt is going to blitz the crap out of him, Chris. They are going to pressure him like crazy. And I think that has a chance to knock him off his game a little bit and make it a lot closer than the experts are predicting. So it heartens me. I respect and trust your college football betting acumen as much as anybody. So it pumps me up to know that you're kind of seeing the same thing with this game.
Yeah, just you might not want to watch it because seeing Phil Dracovic throw passes might give you an upset stomach. But yeah, Pitt and Pitt's defense will always come to play, especially at home. So yeah, taking over a touchdown. Once this game went over a touchdown, I got a little more comfortable with it. All right, let's go on. Want to talk to you, get one more play out of you, squeeze that little bit more information out of you, Andrew. What's a total that you've recognized as a play that you might want to identify for Saturday, or you want to jump on now before the line moves?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to give you 2. I'm going to give you a bonus one here, Chris. The first one I'm going to give you is the under in the Florida State Clemson game. That's going to be the first one I go with here. Jordan Travis got banged up against Boston College. He came back into the game. I love their wide receivers, the kid that transferred in from Michigan State, and the other guy that's an absolute monster who's like 6'8".
Johnny Wilson.
Who's just a giant. I mean, Johnny Wilson. He is a matchup problem. And so I think the expectation here is people are so down on Clemson that they think Florida State is going to go in there and score 30-plus points. I got to see it to believe it. I mean, things got so bad for Clemson against Duke and the way they started their second game, I think that was against Charleston Southern, that I think people have that stuck in their head. We've seen even in down years, Clemson's team start to kind of trend up after maybe the first 3 or 4 games. So I think Clemson will maybe even win this game outright. And I think the way that they do that is by keeping the game under. So that's my first one. And the other one is, Chris, anytime Iowa is involved in a game, I want to bet the under. And I've seen Penn State's defense. I think Penn State's defense might be the best in college football. Now, I'm biased because I'm in Pittsburgh, and so I watch every single one of their games, and so I know their personnel better than, say, Georgia's defense or Alabama's defense or the elite SEC team. So this is a little bit of me going with what I know. But with Manny Diaz calling their plays, and with probably between King at corner and Chop Robinson and Carter at linebacker, I mean, they are loaded on defense. what they did at Illinois against a pretty bad quarterback and a team that has a shaky offensive line and they don't have Chase Brown there anymore. I don't know how Cade McNamara and Brian Ferentz come in there for the whiteout game where it's going to be rocking 108,000 people in prime time. Unless they're scoring defensive touchdowns and special team scores, Chris, the only way for the game to go over is if Penn State scores 40 points on its own.
Yeah,
so
I don't think that'll happen.
It's such a low under. It's such a low under. I almost feel like Iowa is a public under team, which almost never happens. People want to bet points. But my eyes tell me there's a very small chance of that very microscopic, super small total hitting in this game. I'm still banging the drum for the under in Penn State, Iowa.
Hey, we don't mind low numbers here. Last week, our big play was Iowa State, Ohio under 42.5. That cleared easily. It was 0-0 at halftime. And, I'm not a big fan of the people who say life's too short to bet the under. I believe the money is a lot of times with the under because the public loves to bet overs. So, a number like 40.5, I'll take it because I think you do have two great defenses here. So, yeah, and that Clemson total you mentioned, 55.5, we're with you. We actually think Clemson wins this game outright. That Duke game was very turnover driven. I think that Clemson's defense will come to play here, especially at home. And Jordan Travis a little banged up last week. Yeah. It was okay to play, but that would be a concern against a team they're going to hit them hard. So Andrew, I want to thank you again for coming on the podcast. Let the listeners know where to find you and on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And obviously on 93.7.
Well, I appreciate you doing that, Chris. Yeah. A lot of our show is NFL Steelers driven, and that's at 93.7 The Fan. On Twitter, I'm at the Pony Express, Pony spelled Poni, like the last four letters of my last name, Andrew Fillipponi. Listen to us. We're 2 to 6 in Pittsburgh. But FanDuel, I do a FanDuel show. It's a radio show. It's called More Ways to Win. It's 10 to noon on Sundays. It's streamed across the Odyssey app. It's a ton of football betting stuff. FanDuel TV, I've got a great relationship with them as well. And a lot of my Twitter account will be stream of consciousness stuff on Saturdays. I'm just like all of your listeners. Actually, this Saturday for these games, I'm going to be out in Vegas for them. I can't wait. I'm going to be watching all these games. So pumped for that. It is such a good weekend. And the fact that you wanted to bring me on for this week and not it's humbling that you thought that much of me, Chris. So yeah, man, anytime you want to do this, I'm down. Send Phil and everybody my best. Appreciate you coming on the show.
I will do that. And again, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Andrew Fillipponi.
You bet. Thanks, Chris.
And now for everyone's favorite part of the show, we're going to bring in Robbie DePola and Jim Seaman, my two brothers from another mother. How you doing, guys? What's up, Jim?
I'm doing all right, Chris. How about you? Another year older here for you.
Yeah, we don't talk about that. I'm too much gray hair in my beard. I'm good though.
That's just left over from lunch.
Hey, we're excited. It's 5-star week, and all of our North Coast subscribers get this play for free. So we're hoping to put out something that builds our pockets back up after a little bit of a rough week. But I think that the totals game of the month won last week. Hopefully we pull the trigger on a good game this week, win this 5-star game of the month that we're giving out free to all subscribers. Robbie, you ready for this big weekend?
Yeah, got a big slate of games. I read that this is the most this week will include the most ranked versus ranked matchups in September since I believe 2006. So a lot of good games. We're starting to get into some conference games, some big time marquee matchups. So yeah, should be a good week for us here.
Yeah, no doubt. I love the FCS, but I'm about done with the FCS versus FBS games, clogging up the slate, causing us more work than we need to have to do. And it's nice to have good marquee matchups that we're all looking forward to. So let's get into it right away. Jim coming in 3-6 right now. Me and Robbie are tied at 5-4. Robbie, you've done better on your sides, 5-1 on your sides. I've been good on my totals. I'm 3-0 on my totals this year. Robbie and Jim, you guys have been a little lacking on the totals, but better on the sides. So let's hope that we can get those totals back up. And I'd love to see us all three of us have a winning week this week. So let's get it started. Robbie, you're going to go first. You had a 2-1 week last week.
Yeah, gonna look to build off another successful week, at least on my sides. Gonna go to not a game that a lot of people will probably have their attention on with there being 63 games this week, but Texas State is hosting Nevada. And the reason why I like this game so much is Texas State is under new head coach G.J. Kinney, who spent last season at Incarnate Word, an FCS school. And Incarnate Word, as the three of us know, were very notorious for running the score up on teams. They did not let their foot up off the gas whatsoever. They would score into the 50s, 60s, sometimes even higher than that. And yeah, they averaged 52 points a game last season. Their average margin of victory last season was 32 points. So I say all that to say, I don't think G.J. Kinney will let his foot off the gas. And I think Texas State has the offense in place to be able to have their way with a Nevada team who is 0-3. Their defense is giving up 524 yards per game, 43 points per game, and their passing defense has been atrocious. They're allowing 355 passing yards per game and allowing opponents to complete 75% of their passes. Meanwhile, Texas State comes in, like I mentioned, first-year head coach, totally revamped the system there, running a high-powered offense that is averaging through 3 weeks 456 yards per game, 44 points per game. They did just put up 77 points, which was just a couple shy of a school record, and 684 yards last week. Granted, it was against Jackson State, a not so good FCS program, now that Deion Sanders left, but still, they scored on 11 of their 13 drives, and they just did not let up whatsoever. They're led by TJ Finley, who's hitting 68%. He's got a 6.0 ratio. They ran for almost 400 yards last week, and I just think they're in a position to where they're at home, and they're just going to want to run that system, get these guys even more reps heading into Sun Belt play. Texas State probably feels like they have a legitimate chance to at least compete in the Sun Belt, and Nevada, on the other hand, just looks like they're going to struggle again this season. They're only putting up they're only averaging 296 yards per game and 15 points per game, while Texas State doesn't have an elite defense by any means. They do get after the quarterback. They've recorded 14 sacks in 3 weeks, and they're only giving up 3.1 yards per carry. They had a pretty good home crowd last week. I would anticipate there's a lot of excitement behind this program. I can anticipate another big crowd, and I think they will see a lot of points. The line is 17, but I see Texas State putting up, I mean, they'll probably get into the 40s, if not the 50s here. I mean, I see them winning this game by at least 3 touchdowns, probably closer to 4 touchdowns. And I like Texas State minus the 17.
Yeah, now the thing I like, you mentioned G.J. Kinney, who was notorious for letting his Incarnate Word teams blow their opponent out, and they often were scoring in the last couple of games to add extra touchdowns. And their backup quarterback, Malik Hornsby, is an Arkansas transfer, was a very highly recruited kid, like top 10 quarterback in his class, and he ran for over 100 yards last week against Jackson State when he got his chance. So they're going to keep running their offense no matter what the score is. So if they do get a lead, you can factor in them tacking on an extra touchdown at the end, because that's just the way they run their offense. All right. I'm going to go with a little rivalry game for my first selection. The 102nd Battle of the Iron Skillet. The home team in this series has not fared very well. 0-7-1 against the spread. This is SMU versus TCU. And I'm going to look at the underdog here. SMU getting 6.5 points. I'd love to get that extra hook if you can get it. Maybe buy it up. But, a couple weeks ago, SMU played at Oklahoma. So they've already had a big road test. And they fared okay in that game. They lost 28-11, so it was a 17-point loss. But they were actually held a very, very small yardage edge. So the yardage was basically even. Had a lot of missed opportunities in that game, missed field goal, a couple stopped on downs, a fumble. Preston Stone, their young quarterback, has thrown for 798 yards in 3 games. He threw for 250 against Oklahoma in that game. And 9-2 ratio. So he has had some success. He's spreading the ball around. 4 different receivers have over 100 yards already this year. They're coming off a light win against Prairie View A&M, where they basically ran through it and didn't need to really stress too much. TCU is a team I think was a little overrated coming into the season. And they got exposed in that first game. We found out that they're not as good as they were last year when they made the national championship game. Lost to Colorado in the opener. And since then, they beat Nichols and they knocked off Houston last week, who's struggling offensively. But I think in a rivalry game like this, SMU definitely can keep this close. You look at the last few matchups, an 8-point game, 8-point game, 7-point game. So, 8-point game, 8-point game, 3-point game. So, the home team struggles in this series. It tends to be a close game. And I just think that SMU is a little better than people realize. TCU, not as good as people thought they were coming into the year. And they're coming down off that high of making the national championship game. And it's not the same team as last year. Last year was Max Duggan, Kendre Miller, Quentin Johnston. All of those guys are gone now. That's a much different team in terms of leadership, a much different team in terms of talent. So I think SMU getting 6.5 is the play here. Like the dog, take the points. Could even see an outright upset. I'm not going to call for it, but I will take the 6.5. SMU covers this one. I think they can cover by at least a field goal, maybe more. Okay, let's go to Jim. I'm sensing you're going to have a directional play that's really going to excite me.
My directional Michigan MAC schools, of course. And I'm going to go with Eastern Michigan. They're 6.5-point dog at Jacksonville State. Some of this, I really didn't think they would be a dog, but they did just get by Massachusetts last week by 2 points. And that's kind of Eastern Michigan style. When they're favored, a lot of times they'll win, but they don't make it pretty. But when they're the dog, they're just money. I mean, they are 25-6 and is an away dog under Chris Crichton. He gets them. They've been to 4 bowls in the past 5 years. And that's because they win these games. They win these close games. They always keep the games close. It looks like Jacksonville State is just 5-18 as a home favorite, which is another reason I kind of like this game. You also have Jacksonville State this year. The 2 games that they won, they were plus 3 turnovers, plus 4 turnovers. Eastern Michigan has they're plus 3 turnovers this year. They're not a team that turns the ball over a lot. They're very disciplined. Once again, that's because their head coach. They try not to give up those, big plays. Jacksonville State is off a bye, but they do have they're playing their CUSA game against also new FBS member Sam Houston State next week. And that's kind of that FCS, they played a few times there. It's, to me, that's a more important game. You're looking at, you have Eastern Michigan coming in. A lot of these guys probably haven't necessarily heard of Eastern Michigan. they don't necessarily know that they're that tough. You got to look at it and they look at the scoreboard and go, oh, they just got by UMass by 2 points, and that was on a late score. I just Jacksonville State was actually outgained by UTEP in the opener by 89 yards, so they're not overpowering. And anytime you give me Eastern Michigan as a dog, especially plus 6.5, I'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely. Jacksonville State's not exactly an offensive juggernaut. 344 yards per game, but they only have one passing touchdown on the year. Not sure who's going to play quarterback for them this week. Zion Webb, the seventh-year guy, or Logan Smothers, the Nebraska transfer. But yeah, Jim, you're right. Eastern Michigan's been money as an away dog, and Jacksonville State struggles as a home favorite. So getting 6.5 here again, great if you can get the 7. But you got to take the points when you got Eastern Michigan involved. Like we wrote in Power Sweep, it's their script. It's how they play every year for quite some time now under Chris Creed. All right, let's move on to the second round. We're going to go to Robbie for his second selection.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to go back to the Sun Belt for my second selection. You got another non-conference game here, kind of another, I won't call it an obscure game, but again, a game that might not be on a lot of people's radars given the slate of games and marquee matchups this week. But we're just trying to give you winners here, so bear with us. I'm going to go to Louisiana. They're hosting Buffalo. Buffalo is off to a 0-3 start. Not a good start for them. Their defense is really what's been giving them problems this year.
Apologies for that 2-star last week on Buffalo.
yeah, that was a rough one. But so Buffalo's defense is giving up 510 yards per game, 44 points per game. They're giving up 230 rushing yards, 5.8 yards a carry. I bring up the rushing defense specifically because Louisiana is a team that when they were under Billy Napier before he left for Florida, they were a team that loved to establish the run. The run game was their identity. I think they're trying to get back to that under second-year head coach Michael Desormeaux. They've averaged 228 rushing yards per game, 6.0 yards per carry. And last week against a not great UAB team, they ran for 305 and 7.6 yards per carry. Louisiana is going to be without their starting quarterback, Ben Woldridge, who got hurt early in the game. However, looking more into what happened in that UAB game, they brought in a backup, Zion Chris, who ended up hitting 14 of 20 passes, threw for 174, also ran for 103 yards and a pair of scores. So Zion Chris is going to bring that run game dual threat element to the quarterback position that a guy like Ben Woldridge, who's more of a pocket passer, doesn't give the Cajuns. And I think that might actually open up their offense because when they were playing for the Sun Belt title for those years under Billy Napier, they had a mobile quarterback in Levi Lewis who he was a dynamic runner as well as a pretty good passer. So this offense operates best when you have a dynamic quarterback who can run and throw, and you got a good stable of running backs to hand the ball off to. And I think that's what's going to happen here. Buffalo not doing anything special on the offensive side of the ball, only putting up 347 yards per game. The Cajuns, on the other hand, have held teams to 322 yards per game, only giving up 109 rush, 3.0 YPC. They've collected 15 sacks in 3 games, including 7 last week. And I just think they're going to get after the quarterback. Buffalo has only given up 2 sacks, which is probably the only good thing to say about their offense so far. But they could be in for trouble here. The line right now is only 8.5, and so I think that's pretty cheap. I would have expected this line to be more closer to 10 or 11. So the fact that it's only 8.5, I think the Cajuns can get that job done here. They're not gonna overlook this game, chance to go to 3-1 on the season. And I just think Buffalo making that trip down south still might have to deal with some heat, humidity, not really a scenario that Buffalo's used to playing in. They got dominated last week by Liberty, a team that has a dual threat quarterback as well. So yeah, I just think 8.5 here is cheap. So give me the Cajuns minus the points.
All right, let's do it. All right, we've done a lot of lower marquee games. I'm going to jump into the SEC here. I've got Texas A&M minus 7.5 at home against Auburn. And I'll be honest, the one thing that scares me about this game is betting against Hugh Freeze. I love Hugh Freeze as a coach. I think he's a great coach when a team's an underdog. He's got a great away dog record. But, this is a bit of a desperate Texas A&M team. They already lost a road game to Miami. And then, they have to have this game. There's a lot of heat on Jimbo Fisher right now. And I think that, you look at Auburn, they're 3-0 coming in. 2 of those wins were, against poor competition, UMass and Samford. And then they needed a late comeback and only had 230 yards of offense at California and won 14-10. So, nothing special from Auburn, even though they're 3-0. A&M 2-1. 2 of their wins were, against poor competition in New Mexico and ULM. They did blow those 2 teams out, which is nice to see because last year they were not getting distance even on bad teams. The Aggies have that big home edge. It's a night game in College Station. Connor Wegman getting better one snap at a time, at least according to the article I just read, but actually has a 16-2 ratio in the basically the year of starting because he didn't take the job last year until mid-season. I think it was the 5th game, and then he ended up not starting a couple games. Actually, it was the 6th game that he took over the job last year. So 16-2 ratio in less than a year of football is actually pretty spectacular. He completes 71% of his passes this year. I think they have the talent edge on Auburn. Hugh Freeze will turn Auburn around. I just don't think it's yet. I think this is one that is going to be biting off a little more than they could chew right now. A&M needs this win bad, and I think it'll be a double-digit A&M win. I could see it going up to as much as 2 touchdowns for the Aggies, and you're only laying 7.5 right now. Again, if you can, buy the half, play it on the safe side, but I'm comfortable at 7.5. I don't think they have a problem covering it. Jim, next up, and you've got a play I really like.
Yep. And once again, involves the MAC team, but this time going against them, and that is Indiana minus 16 over Akron. Indiana is quietly 3-0 ATS this year, but they're 1-2 straight up. So that means they need this win. They're not going to look past Akron. Akron, on the other hand, is struggling this year. Akron lost to Temple by 3, and you thought, well, gee, that was actually a good thing, but Temple's not very good this year. Then they only get by Morgan State by 3.
And that was thanks to a fumble return when Morgan State was running out the clock.
Morgan State was trying to run out the clock. They knocked the ball out, picked the ball up, and ran it in for a touchdown. I think what it was is they probably would have been able to run it down to about 30 seconds, and then they would have had a punt. But still, you are correct. That was because of that. Indiana is 13-4 as a home favorite, and they're 7-2 at home versus non-Power 5 teams. Akron is on an 0-6 run versus Power 5 teams, with the average non-cover over 12 points per game. The other thing is Akron is already in 3 games has given up 12 sacks. They're not getting any protection on the quarterback. Quarterback's not getting any time. On the other hand, in 3 games, Indiana does have 6 sacks, and that's 6 sacks in the last 2 games because they didn't have any versus Ohio State. And that's the other thing. I mean, they played Ohio State. They only lost 23-3. Ohio State is a top 10 team. That's actually, to me, was an impressive performance on their part. And I think here it's a good Big Ten team playing a bad MAC team at this time. And 16 points, I think, is cheap. So I'm going to say take Indiana minus the 16 over the Zips.
Yeah, and I've been complimentary of Taven Jackson, the redshirt freshman quarterback, the transfer from Tennessee. I think that he's got a lot of talent. He didn't leave Tennessee because he couldn't play there. He left because they signed an $8 million NIL kid that he wasn't going to have a chance to beat out no matter what he did. And, since he's taken over the job, which he only played a half against Indiana State, he looked great. He completed 18 of 21 in that game. And then they gave the second half to the other kid, Sorsby. And then he plays against Louisville and throws for 299, completes 24-34, and almost led the comeback because they were down 21-0, and they ended up getting within 7. And I think they got stopped on downs late in that game. Otherwise, they could have tied it. So, yeah, I think that Indiana looks like a strong play here against a bad Akron team. Terry Bowden might be a little long in the tooth right now.
It's not Terry Bowden.
Yeah, I was going to say it doesn't really matter.
He's at ULM.
Moorhead.
Oh, that's right. Joe Moorhead. Sorry.
That's his second year.
Yeah, they let Terry Bowden go. Yeah.
I thought you were going to say something. Terry Bowden might be like excited or.
No, I completely forgot who was coaching there. It's Akron. It doesn't really
that
matter.
Old age that's getting to him. He's starting to lose his memory.
Getting older.
Yeah, it's bad Akron team though, which is pretty much par for the course for them. All right, let's move on to our totals. Let's start with you, Robbie. We've got to get our totals on track. We did have our totals game of the month, which I got to give Robbie a little credit. I was kind of concerned about using an under 42.5 last week, but the other guys kind of pushed me on it, and we came to a consensus that should be the play, and that was one of the positives of last weekend among some negatives, a lot of negatives. But the totals game of the month was a good thing, and Robbie was all over that. So, Robbie, what do you got for your total for the podcast?
Yeah, I'm gonna go. Hopefully, try to get off the get a win here. Get off the 0-3 train on my totals. Gonna go with a team that is clicking on all cylinders so far this season. Gonna go with Oklahoma. They're traveling to face Cincinnati. Yes, this is a conference game. If you would have told me this when I was in high school, I would have been like, "You're crazy." But here we are. Oklahoma's facing Cincinnati in a Big 12 game. First and only meeting as Big 12 foes, as the Sooners are moving on to the SEC next year. Oklahoma's offense has really, really gotten off to a hot start this year. I'll preface this by saying, yes, I know they've played Arkansas, SMU, and Tulsa. SMU is a pretty decent team, but Arkansas State and Tulsa are near the bottom of their respective conferences. So they haven't exactly played top-tier competition. But for me, I like to see these superior teams beat up on inferior foes, and that's exactly what Oklahoma has done. They beat Arkansas State 73-0. They beat Tulsa 66-17. And they're led by Dylan Gabriel at quarterback, who's hitting an unbelievable 82.5% of his passes. He's thrown for almost 1,000 yards in 3 games, and he's has an 11-to-1 ratio. So Dylan Gabriel, who I think was feeling a little bit of the heat because Oklahoma did bring in a 5-star true freshman, and from what I've read, he's kind of pushed Gabriel to become a better version of himself at quarterback. So that's working out for the Sooners well there. They're taking on a Cincinnati team that did lose last week to Miami of Ohio. That is a rivalry game. Not sure how much of a look ahead that was because that is a big game for them. It was at night. Big crowd on hand. They still did manage to gain 538 yards in that game. Their offenses looked pretty good early on, better than we expected, led by Emory Jones, the former Florida and Arizona State quarterback, who's hitting 66%, has a 7-to-3 ratios, also ran for over 140 yards. Cincinnati's run game has really been been the strength of their offense, running for 239 and 5.0 YPC per game. And while Oklahoma's defense hasn't given up a lot, I think this is probably the best offense or most well-rounded offense that they've faced. I think Cincinnati can get a few touchdowns on them. Oklahoma did give up 17 points to Tulsa. The game was never really in doubt, but even still, when you get those teams that are scoring 50, 60 points, sometimes the defense might have to go back on the field so quick they might be a little gassed. And I think Cincinnati is a strong team. They are at home. But this Sooners team, I think Brett Venables woke up the defense a little bit, woke up the whole team in general. He was not going to stand for another subpar season there. And I think he's got the Sooners playing well. I think the Sooners can put up in the 40s. I think the Sooners put up probably about 45, maybe even more. I think Cincinnati can get at least into the 20s. That's kind of where I'm expecting this game to finish out. I'm thinking like a 45-24 game here. With the total being at 57.5 right now, I think it goes over that total of 57.5.
Yeah, I think that Oklahoma's got a juggernaut offense, and Cincinnati is looking like they're much improved offensively this year. All right, I'm gonna go with a Pac-12 game. I'm going to go with an under. UCLA, Utah, under 52.5. This is pretty simple. Cam Rising might play this week. If he doesn't play great, I think that UCLA's defense is underrated and is going to limit Utah's offense. I think Utah has a very good defense. We saw, that opener against Florida. They held Florida 346 yards. They really shut them down in the first half. Held Florida to 3 points and 132 yards in the first half of that game. A lot of Florida's yards came in the second half when they were down big. So Utah has a very good defense. But the big question is, Cam Rising play? If Cam Rising plays, I don't think this offense is going to be at its peak ability, because I have to think first game back, they're going to be a little conservative with him running. They're not going to have a lot of called running plays. I'm sure that they'll be confident in him, but you're not going to want to put him in harm's way a ton. So that might mean, and he's going to have to knock off a little rust. That might mean that the offense might not be clicking fully. Utah's got a strong defense, allowing 271 yards a game. UCLA, like I said, has a underrated defense. I think they allowed 279 yards a game themselves. 10 sacks on the season, so they could really pressure Rising. They're only giving up 70 rushing yards a game, 2 yards a carry, which we all know Utah's strength is running the ball, even with Cam Rising in the game. So I think these are two very, very strong defenses. UCLA has a redshirt true freshman quarterback who's looked good, but this is going to be his first real road test. And you have Utah's got a quarterback that's coming off a major injury if he plays. So two strong defenses. Utah is a team that I think will win this game, but I definitely think the game could be low scoring. Even though Chip Kelly's involved in this game, I'm going to go under 52.5, UCLA versus Utah. All right, Jim, you've got the last total.
I've got the last total, and hopefully this will turn it around a little bit. I'm going to go with the Oregon and Colorado over 70. Now, this game it's going to get a lot of attention, of course, with Colorado doing as well as they have. But if you watch last week, their game against Colorado State, Colorado gave up 499 yards. They put up 418. But the real interesting thing is they are only averaging 2 yards per carry, just 61 yards per game rushing. Colorado does not have a good rushing game. They've given up 16 sacks, a big part of that, but they are still struggling to run. So the only way they're going to be able to score and keep up with Oregon is by passing. Now they are putting up 418 yards passing per game. Their quarterback, Sanders, he's got a 10-to-1 ratio. He's hitting 78.7%. So they're going to be able to put up some points here. Oregon, they won't stop putting up points. If they can, they're going to put them up. The only game that they scored a low of 38 this year, and that was against Texas Tech. But why was that? Because Texas Tech ran for 174 yards, 5.4 yards per carry, and they were able to burn some of the clock. Colorado isn't going to be able to do that. So this is going to be a high-scoring, back-and-forth game. If Oregon can come out and get ahead, Colorado's going to have to play catch-up. If Colorado seems to, sometimes start off hot, and Oregon has the offense to basically keep up with them, I think this is going to be a very high-scoring game and fun to watch if you like offense, not so much if you like defense.
Yeah, and you got Bo Nix on Oregon's side, and he's a heck of a quarterback, and he always performs best at home. And the unfortunate injury to Travis Hunter, technically it hurts Colorado on both sides of the ball.
Right.
But I think that he is a dominant corner. He's a good wide receiver and a dynamic playmaker for them, but it really hurts them on the defensive side of the ball, where I think Oregon can expose them. So
yeah, and the other thing with Oregon is, if you think, okay, maybe they'll try to run the ball to keep it out of Colorado State's hand. Oregon's actually averaging 7.1 yards per carry. 224 yards on the ground. I mean, they're getting big runs. So I don't think even if they run it, that's going to slow down the scoring.
No, I agree. I think this Oregon team is in for a strong performance, especially on offense. Robbie, any parting words for the listeners on 5-Star Week?
No, not a ton. Just thanks for listening again, guys. We're hoping to give you some winners here, and we're going to be looking at these games extra hard. Try to find a winner. We need some winners for you guys. I know last week wasn't good. Trust me, we're just as upset and disappointed when these plays don't win, because I can speak for myself and Chris and a couple other people here that we are betting these games. So we feel it too. So we're hoping to give you some winners and get some money back in your pockets.
Jim, any parting words?
Thanks for listening. But we did have a nice win, like I said, or as you've said, with the 4.5 star last week, and I think we'll continue that with the 5 star this week. It's an exciting weekend and some really good football games out there.
Go team.
As always, we're going to give out a $10 discount code, $10 off Power Sweep if you sign up, and the code will be Oregon. So the code Oregon gets you $10 off. And I'll tell you what, it'll be $10 off Power Sweep, or if you call in to 1-800-654-3448, you get $10 off any exec service for this week. We're only going to do that for exec service this week. Actually, we'll do $15 off exec service. $15 off exec service for this week if you call in with code Oregon. That's the prices on the back of Power Sweep. $15 off for exec service, or you go to ncsports.com, you get $10 off Power Sweep for this year or next year if you've already signed up for this year. Thank you again to Andrew Fillipponi for joining us. 93.7 The Fan in Pittsburgh. Really had a lot of fun talking to him, and I really hope that everyone enjoys this awesome week of football, because there's a lot of great games on the college slate. For Jim, Robbie, and myself, can't wait to have you guys listen next week.
Take care, guys.
Take care.
Bye-bye then.